Okay, so here we have Dr. Kenneth L. Gentry, who holds to the high partial preterist slash postmillennialist eschatological view. And then we are going to go to who is Antichrist. And this is Dr. Taylor Marshall, who is a Roman Catholic. And he will take the futurist view versus the preterist view of Kenneth L. Gentry. Let's just listen to this little short clip, 48 seconds. Book of Revelation with Kenneth L. Gentry. This is from Apologia Studios. So they're promoting this as a series here. I'm going to start from the beginning. All new series.
We know that Revelation is the most exciting and confounding book in all of Scripture, and it is the subject, therefore, of best-selling books, countless sermons.
Did you see that? The Left Behind series, and now they're showing John Hagee and these prophetic charts that they bring up. So let me just point out the dispensational futurist eschatological system and the 5 main false teachings of that system. The pre-trib rapture, there is no temporal separation of the rapture and the second advent, I argue. They're the same event, not 2 temporally separate events. There is no such thing as a 7-year period of tribulation. That's taken from a false interpretation of Daniel 9:24 through 27, which requires that we actually go through that text. Let's see here. File 7-year tribulation fallacies. I do a whole paper on that. This is the 7-year period of Great Tribulation fallacy. A look at the messianic prophecy of Daniel 9:24 through 27. And that's what it is. It's a messianic prophecy. It has nothing to do with the Antichrist. Nothing at all. Antichrist is not prophesied in Daniel 9:24 through 27 at all whatsoever. Antichrist is prophesied in Daniel 7, and the what rough beasts, here's what rough beasts and the Antichrist is the little horn of Daniel chapter 7. Futurists say Antichrist is future. Preterists say Antichrist was in the distant past. But here is the 5 main false teachings. The modern nation state that calls itself Israel has the pivotal role to play in end times events. That's a big one. And then Christ will return at his second advent and set up a 1,000-year reign on the earth. That is also false. But this is what the preterists are trying to argue against is futurists. And that's why it is so disheartening and amazing to witness preterists arguing against futurists and vice versa. Summary of the 2 positions: preterism, Antichrist way in the distant past. Futurism, Antichrist way in the distant future still. Or maybe the not too distant future. So futurism and preterism. Both of these are abandonments of the Reformation. Both of them are. Okay.
Radio programs, TV movies, it is in the air in modern evangelical circles.
Yes, dispensational futurism needs to be refuted. And here's Dr. Taylor Marshall. Let's see what he has to say.
Who is Antichrist, and it conforms to this apocalypse of Methodius. I think this stuff is great. A lot of people get worried about the Antichrist, the mark of the beast. Look, that's going to be for 3.5 years.
3.5 years. You see that? So the preterists will also say it's 3.5. The 1,260 days, the 42 months, was also a literal 3.5 years, but just way in the distant past. Whereas futurists say that this will be a literal 3.5 years in the future. Here's Francisco Ribera. Francisco Ribera was a Spanish Jesuit theologian identified. He was the first systematizer of the futurist Christian eschatological view that Dr. Kenneth L. Gentry wants to fight against. But Kenneth L. Gentry fights against the futurist view with preterism, an equally fallacious view. So here's Francisco Ribera said, just as we heard Dr. Taylor Marshall say, to accomplish this, Ribera understood the 1,260 days, 42 months, and time times half a time of prophecy literally, and rejected the interpretation of 1,260 years against the Reformation. The Reformation held the 1,260 years. Here's John Gill's commentary on Revelation chapter 11, verse 2. The holy city they shall tread underfoot 42 months. Notice this. 3.5 literal years is too short a time for her to gain so much power, honor, and riches as in the 13th, 17th, and 18th chapters of the book of Revelation show. So this must be understood prophetically of so many months of years. So which account Daniel used and John after him, 42 months, reckoning a day for a year after the prophetic style makes 1260 literal years. Francisco Ribera said, nope, they're to be interpreted literally. And that's what Taylor Marshall says. The 3.5 years are to be interpreted literally, just in the future, even from our time. Whereas the preterists say that, nope, those prophecies are way in the distant past.
I believe once we complete the study, you will have a new appreciation for it and a better understanding of it, and a lesser fear of a grocery receipt that says $6.66.
Okay, so hyperbole there. Here's Kenneth L. Gentry in another talk here. Let's see here.
Revelation today in the modern evangelical environment is almost universally misinterpreted because Christians don't use the keys to unlock the mysteries. John states clearly and often these events are near, they're shortly to come to pass. They're not 2,000 years distant.
Well, they're not 2,000 years distant. They started in John's day, and they are prophetic events throughout church history. So when we get to the book of Revelation, the 1,260 years, the 42 months, 1,260 years of the two witnesses prophesying, what are these two witnesses? If these are 1,260 years, which did not begin until after the fall of the Roman Empire, just like Jonathan Edwards says. Here, let's go to Edwards quick. Christian Classics Ethereal Library. That was John Gill's commentary on Revelation 11, verse 2. Let's go to Jonathan Edwards. Let's go to Jonathan Edwards. We'll see who's sticking with the Reformation and who's abandoning the Reformation. Okay? I argue, of course, that, Dr. Taylor Marshall, being a Roman Catholic, is not going along with the Reformation, and neither are dispensational futurists going along with the Reformation, with this whole false system of eschatology. But Dr. Kenneth L. Gentry is also not going along. He's abandoning the Reformation as well. Here's Jonathan Edwards. Works of Jonathan Edwards, Volume 1. Down to 13, History of the Work of Redemption. Open that up. Period 3, from Christ's resurrection to the end of the world. Now notice this. The destruction of Jerusalem, then to the time of Constantine in the 4th century, then to the rise of Antichrist only after the fall of the Roman Empire. That's what he's going to talk about. Then to the Reformation. I'm going to go on to the Reformation. I come now to the darkest and most dismal day that ever the Christian church saw, and probably the darkest that ever it will see, from the rise of Antichrist after the fall of the Roman Empire to the Reformation by Luther and others. The true church in this space was for many hundred years in a state of great obscurity. Like the woman in the wilderness, Revelation chapter 12, she was almost hid from sight and observation. Watch this. The time when the reign of Antichrist began, it is certain that the 1,260 days or years, which are so often in Scripture mentioned as the time of the continuance of Antichrist's reign, did not begin before the year of Christ 479. So again, here's my what rough beasts. Futurism, false. Preterism, false. Both of these systems are false. Abandonments of the Reformation. Here is the 4 beasts that rise up out of the sea. Babylonian, followed by the Medo-Persian, followed by the Grecian, followed by the Roman Empire, comes to an end in the 5th century AD. Not 70 AD, not the 1st century. The prophecy extends all the way out to the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD and beyond it in Daniel chapter 7. The 10 horns symbolize the 10 lesser vassal tribal kingdoms that made up the Roman Empire after its fall. Ostrogoths, Burgundians, Vandals, Heruli, Visigoths, Suevi, Alemanni, Franks, Saxons, Lombards. To this day, 7 of these 10 still basically make up the people groups of Europe. To this day, 7 of these 10. The Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths were all uprooted. So the Burgundians, Visigoths, Suevi, Alemanni, Franks, Saxons, Lombards, these are all still the people groups of Europe to this very day. The French call Germany Alemania. The French call, in the French language, They don't call Germany Germany. They call Germany Alemannia because of the Alemanni people, these Germanic peoples, okay, of which I am a descendant. My last name is very German, okay, as my brother Reformed Pilgrim has pointed out. He was like the only one who's ever pronounced my last name right because it's very German, and he, I think, speaks German or knows German or is familiar with German. Anyway, so the Dr. John Gill, did we go over Gill? Yeah, we already went over Gill. The 10 horns out of this kingdom were the 10 kingdoms which sprung out of the Roman Empire upon the dissolution of it about AD 476. He gives Mede's list, very similar to my own. Sir Isaac Newton's list, very similar to my own. These were all historicists, not preterists and not futurists. This horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. That's papal Rome. 3 of the 10 would have to be removed first. That was the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths, finally removed from Rome in 538 AD. Okay, so you can see this is historicism. This is why Jonathan Edwards says, after the fall of the Roman Empire, sometime after, this 1260 years of papal persecution would begin. Now, it already started long before this, but it was the restrainer of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that had to be removed. And that restrainer, the hinderer, was the Roman Empire from hindering the rise of the Antichrist. And the rise of the Antichrist was gradual. The Christian church corrupted itself. This is the apostasy of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that he's talking about here. This is Edwards again. It talks about the rise of papal power, claiming more and more power to himself, placing countries under an interdict, where the sacred administrations could have no validity, so that in their apprehension, in Christians' apprehension, they were left in a miserable and damnable state because the interdict was imposed by the papacy upon various and sundry kings and princes and their lands and the peoples in their lands, as the Pope and his clergy robbed the people of their, notice this, ecclesiastical and civil liberties and privileges. That's what the papacy does. What does the United States of America do? And ensure. It ensures ecclesiastical and civil liberty. That's what it's supposed to do, the United States, anyway. It's not perfect. None of us are perfect, obviously. But we do not have an ecclesiastical body that can enforce theology and worship. Okay, because that would be taking away people's ecclesiastical liberties and privileges, just like the papacy did. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the man of sin, son of perdition, that is the Antichrist. Daniel 7, the little horn, that is the Antichrist. Revelation 13, 1 through 10, the sea beast, that's the Antichrist. Revelation 17, the scarlet harlot, that's the Antichrist. All referring to the same entity, papal Rome. Papal Rome. But again, if you're going to listen to Gentry, or you're going to be a preterist and say, oh, all that happened in the distant past. Whereas Dr. Taylor Marshall says, nope, it's still to come in the future, but it's only going to be 3.5 years, so don't worry too much about it. No, Jonathan Edwards, John Gill, all the Reformation saw this as a continuing church history outplaying of Bible prophecy in church history. That's what I'm talking about. 1260 years. Who are the 2 witnesses then? Who are the 2? Are they Enoch and Elijah? I think that's what Dr. Taylor Marshall said, is they're Enoch and Elijah. And you'll hear many dispensational futurists saying that too. No, the 2 witnesses are the Old and the New Testaments. The Old and the New Testaments. See the prophecy of Zechariah here with the 2 olive trees, the 2 lampstands. They make war. A woman in the wilderness for 1260 literal years. But this is this woman clothed with the sun. This is not Mary. The papists always say this is Mary. It's not. This woman is Israel. Just see Genesis 37, verses 9 through 11. In Joseph's dream, you will see this is where this imagery is coming from. Genesis 37. I think I have it in a note. Yep. Genesis 37. The woman represents all the sons of Israel or Jacob in totality. Genesis 37, 9 through 11. So when we get to Revelation chapter 12, this woman clothed with the sun is Israel, the church of the Old Testament. She gave birth to a male child. Her child was raptured up to God and to his throne. Notice Jesus was raptured to heaven, to his throne. Acts chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. A cloud took him out of their sight. This is the ascension of Jesus. He ascended into heaven, into heaven, into heaven, into heaven 4 times in Acts chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. So he's raptured to God and to his throne in heaven. But the woman fled into the wilderness to be nourished for 1,260 years, which didn't begin until after the fall of the Roman Empire. Notice this. This woman is Israel. This woman is the New Testament church. But in the prophecy, it's the same woman, not a different woman. Dispensational futurist, point number 4, the modern nation state that calls itself Israel has the pivotal role to play in end times events. Nonsense. Nonsense. This woman is the church, the New Testament church. This woman, clothed with the sun, is the Old Testament church, but it's the same woman, not 2 different women. Dispensational futurists say these must be 2 different women. This is Israel and this is the church, and never the twain shall meet, apparently. Okay, now war arose in heaven. This is at the ascension of Christ into heaven. War broke out in heaven. And this war was a polemical war, polemos and polemeo, fighting and fought back. This is polemeo and polemos are from whence we get our English term polemics, polemical. And this fighting was not done with spears and swords and all that stuff. This was not a carnal war. This was a debate. An apologetic debate. Why do you think Christians are into apologetics? It's in our nature to argue for the truth, because when Christ raptured to God and to his throne in heaven, war broke out in heaven. This great debate. And what was the war about? Well, notice. Well, Satan was defeated and thrown down to the earth because they were in heaven. But a loud voice in heaven saying, now here's the debate. Here's what the debate topics were. The debate topics of this war in heaven were salvation and the power of salvation, God's grace alone, right? How many times do you see us Calvinists defending sola gratia against all synergists? Because it is an argument about salvation and power. Why do you think we're so passionate about it? Well, because this is the same argument debate war that took place in heaven. The kingdom of our God, the authority of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down. The doctrine of justification by faith alone. We recognize the authority of his Christ. Justification by faith alone. Salvation, the power of that. Where does it come from? Do we conjure up saving faith out of the cauldron of our own power of contrary choice? Or is it something that God infuses into his people by his grace alone? That's where our faith comes from. It is a divine gift of faith. He dragged us to the Son, and we could not help but come. That's why we have come to the Son, because God by his grace, drags us to the Son fully and successfully. The accuser of our brethren thrown down, they have conquered him by what? Conjuring up saving faith out of the cauldron of their own power of contrary choice? Nope, by the blood of the Lamb. That's why Calvinists hold to the highest view of the atonement, is because it is so important to understand the propitiatory, penal, substitutionary atonement sacrifice of the blood of the Lamb. Okay, the sacrifice of Christ. And by the word of their testimony, God giving them faith. But woe to you, earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows his time is short. And when the dragon, Satan, saw that he'd been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. Okay? And of course, we see in Revelation 13, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority to the sea beast, papal Rome. How do you do here? Jonathan Edwards. It is a contrivance. Jonathan Edwards. It is a contrivance of the devil to turn the ministry of Christ into a ministry of the devil. See, this contrivance of the devil, called the mystery of iniquity, we find no enemy of Christ one half so much spoken of in the prophecies of Revelation as this, and the destruction of no enemy is spoken of as so glorious and so happy for the church. This is a contrivance of the devil to turn the ministry of the Christian church into a ministry of the devil. That's what the devil wants. He doesn't want Islam or religious Judaism or Hinduism or Buddhism. They're already his spiritual children. He doesn't need to. What he wants to do is corrupt the ministry of the Christian church to make it into a ministry of the devil. And that's what the papacy has done. 1260 years before the papacy received a deadly wound, which has been healing ever since. So, what rough beast, if we go to 538 AD and you add 1260 years to that, 1260 years, what happens to the papacy in 1798? Napoleon and the Catholic Church, 1798, 1260 years. Napoleon and the Catholic Church. French Revolution. 1796, troops under the command of General Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Italy, defeated the papal army, occupied Ancona and Loreto. Pope Pius VI sued for peace. But General Louis Alexandre Berthier marched to Rome in 1798, unopposed, proclaiming a Roman republic, demanded the Pope renounce his temporal power. Pope Pius VI, 1798. Now, did Jonathan Edwards live long enough to see this? No, he didn't. He died in 1758. Did John Gill live long enough to see this? 1798. No, he died in 1771. Okay? The United States would sign its Constitution, finally, with its Bill of Rights, in 1791. So around this same time, the Earth Beast was rising up to power and would continue to rise up to power as the Sea Beast, at the end of this 42 months, was receiving a deadly wound. Pope Pius VI taken into captivity with the power of the sword, that is, with the military power of specifically the French Republic. And then this other beast is rising up out of the earth, having two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. The United States was founded upon lamb-like principles, Christ-like principles. No other nation was founded on Christ-like principles than the United States. They were all heathens before they became Christian, okay? Nations of Europe were all barbarians, heathens, before they became, quote, Christianized. The earth beast, this was specifically biblical Christianity, biblical Protestantism. Yes, we all have our differences, but here's what, let's go back to ccel.org and look what Philip Schaff says about the United States and its founding. Philip Schaff, oldie but goodie, still a goodie. So many riches. History of the Christian Church, Volume 8. The Swiss Reformation, History of the Christian Church, Philip Schaff, Volume 8. Let's go right to the preface, postscript, preface, second edition, introduction. Okay, Switzerland before the Reformation. Right now. I think it's in the preface. Yeah. Okay, it is in the preface. So I went right past it. But here, he's talking about the strong union between Switzerland and the United States. There's always been a natural sympathy and friendship. Both aim to realize the idea of a government of freedom without license and of authority without despotism. How far have we fallen from that in the United States? And maybe even Switzerland too. But still a stronger bond. So he's talking about the Swiss cantons being 13, the United States originally numbered 13, etc. But he's talking about the Swiss Constitution of 1848 and 1874, the Swiss Republic, following the example of the United States Constitution, was consolidated from a loose aristocratic confederacy into independent cantons into a centralized federal state, etc. But he says even the political aspects of a representative republic, in one respect, the modern Swiss Constitution is even more democratic than that of the United States, for by the initiative, it gives to the people the right of proposing or rejecting national legislation. Can you imagine if we had that in America? That every piece of legislation had to be voted on by all the people. but still a stronger bond of union between the two countries exists, between Switzerland and the United States. Zwingli and Calvin gave a molding influence upon the leading evangelical churches of America. George Bancroft, American historian, who himself was not a Calvinist, derives the republican institutions of the United States from Calvinism. Through the medium of English Puritanism, but a more recent writer, Douglas Campbell of Scotch descent, derives them from Holland, which was still more under the influence of the Genevan reformer than even England. Okay? Calvinism breeds manly, independent, and earnest characters who fear God and nothing else, and favors political and religious freedom. Okay? The earliest and most influential settlers of the United States, the Puritans of England, Presbyterians of Scotland and Ireland, the Huguenots of France, the Reformed from Holland and the Palatinate, were Calvinists, and brought with them the Bible and the Reformed confessions of faith. Calvinism was the ruling theology of New England during the whole colonial period, and it still rules in great measure in theology of the Presbyterian, Congregational, and Baptist churches. Okay? So, the United States, founded upon Christ-like principles, two horns like a lamb, but it would eventually speak like a dragon and eventually enforce the mark of the sea beast, whose deadly wound has been healing ever since it was administered in 1798 from 538 AD. The ruling Antichrist power for 1260 years. Again, that power has been healing ever since it was inflicted. But again, Kenneth L. Gentry, Preterism, nonsense. Taylor Marshall, Futurism, nonsense. The same Futurism of the dispensational Futurist eschatological system. That's all I have. So I know this is long, but let me know what you think in the comments down below. I think that's pretty substantive. Talk to you soon. Lord willing, Soli Deo Gloria.